Hi there, and welcome to this episode of the Guns Magazine podcast. I'm your host and the editor of Guns Magazine, Brent Wheat. Thanks for joining us here on one of the world's biggest gun talk programs as we chat with the interesting folks who make up the world of shooting. Today's episode answers a question we hear a lot, and it's something like, I'm older or I've got a physical problem and I have a hard time shooting my concealed carry self-defense pistol. Well, we've talked about it in previous episodes, but today we're going to talk strictly about some ideas, tips, and strategies on how you can keep carrying your gun and shooting it, even if you're having some physical problems. So I'm going to talk to Roy Huntington, and he's got some experience with this as well as I do. We're going to give you some tips on how to keep carrying that gun well into your 200s. So here comes Roy Huntington and concealed carry for the elderly. Well, Roy, thanks for joining me once again on the podcast.
Sir. You bet.
And I almost used my old man voice because we're going to talk about concealed carry for the elderly. So,
well, and for anybody who has trouble.
Exactly. You know? And we get, I would say this is probably one of the most common technique questions I get as the editor of Guns Magazine. It's no secret our readership is skews older, and I get a lot of questions from folks. And here's the typical email or letter I get. Hey, love your magazine, great talking to you, but and I'm X number of years old. I've carried a gun my entire life, but I'm getting to the point I can't rack a slide or I have trouble manipulating a gun, but I still want to carry. What are your thoughts on that? So we've talked about this in bits and pieces many different times, but we've never actually talked about this. So today we're going to talk about concealed carry, or just self-defense, I guess is probably a broader category for folks that are having some kind of trouble with hand strength or whatever. Also folks that may have some type of unablement. I forget what freaking politically correct word we're supposed to use, but if you're handicapped in some way, shape, or form, whether it just be by age and arthritis or some physical malady, whatever, we're going to talk about that today. So wouldn't you agree, Roy, that is like one of our most common questions we get across all of our various platforms and spectrums?
To the point that I had actually commissioned probably 8 or 10 articles through the years when I was editor at Handgunner. And, Moss, I think, wrote one. I had some other people. I had one guy who was wheelchair bound, but he was a shooter, and he used to compete, and he used to do that. And, boy, it was really insightful. What options and what things they thought of, things that I would have never thought of. And so, I mean, I'm not disabled. I don't ride in a wheelchair, but I certainly know a lot of people, and I've had all these people write these articles. So I've been exposed to some of the challenges and exposed to some of the solutions. So I think it's fair for us to let's chat about it for a while.
Yeah. Well, I think by far the biggest problem is the arthritis issue. And I'm actually getting to that point, even though I'm a spring chicken, but I'm starting to have some issues with my thumbs, of all things. And I know as a lot of shooters get older, especially guys that have put a whole bunch of rounds, especially Magnum rounds downrange, you start having all kinds of trouble and you start having grip strength problems. So let's talk about the issue of if you want to carry a semi-auto, some accommodations you can make. And I think the biggest thing was it Smith & Wesson that started that with the EZ, and they came out with a gun that was easier to cock and load, and suddenly realized there's a whole bunch of people that think that's a really good idea.
When I was invited to Smith & Wesson when they introduced that gun, the Smith & Wesson EZ 380, and when we first got there and they put it up on the screen and it looked like a polymer, single stack.
Ho-hum.
Right? Yeah, I think it has a grip safety even, I think. I can't remember now. Yeah. But, we all groaned. Here's 20 senior gun writers and editors, and we know everything. And it was interesting because the product engineers were talking to us and they were saying, okay, but just wait until you shoot it, right?
Yeah.
So I said, okay. And sure enough, all of us across the board went from doubting Thomas's to, this is a really cool idea, because it's single stack, so it has a narrower, more comfortable grip. My gun didn't have an external safety, and I'm pretty sure it's got a grip safety, and so that handles that problem. The trigger can't be pulled unless the grip safety is taken. And but the slide was so easy to run. And of course, being a 380, the recoil was modest. But with modern 380 ammunition, it's very effective. Black Hills Honey Badger, some of the other ones.
Yeah.
Penetrates as deeply. I mean, it's essentially just as good as kind of a mid-range 9mm load. But suddenly that allows that, 85-year-old guy with arthritis in their hands who writes to us saying, I can't rack the slide on my 45 anymore. It's hard for me to pull the trigger of a double-action revolver. And so then Ruger came out with them, and, other people have come out with these guns. And so if you're there talking about some kind of, as you say, arthritis to your hands, or you're getting older, you're losing muscle mass, and this keeps you in the game.
Yep.
I mean, it really does. And as a matter of fact, I remember I wrote this gun up for the first time. I think I put it on the cover, or somebody. I think one of us did, and boy, it brought everybody out of the woodwork. All these people you're talking about, and like one guy said, I went down and I liked it so much I bought 3. One for me, one for my wife, and he had he was 89 or something. He had a 70-year-old son.
Yeah.
He says, and I bought one for my son. He says, you've changed our life. We're shooting again, and I thought, well, that's really cool. So I think the same thing can apply, if you're in a wheelchair, or, anybody that has limited mobility or limited something, that there are these options out there.
Yeah, one thing I would say, occasionally I get these letters as well. I modified my springs and now the gun's easier. Oh, don't do that. I mean, it can be done, but what you're messing with, especially if you don't know what you're doing, or the person who does the work doesn't know what they're doing, we keep beating that drum, but it affects the mechanical reliability. And not having a gun is bad, almost as bad as having a gun that goes click instead of bang. And
because you're right, because I have people tell me, they say, well, I can't pull the trigger of my J-frame revolver, and they're notoriously harder to pull. Because the hammer has less mass, so it has to hit harder, which means you need a heavier hammer spring. And people say, I took it apart, I took the spring out, I cut 4 coils off of it, put it back in. It's a lot easier to shoot, to dry fire now. The problem is, though, is that as you say, you'll start getting misfires, and it may run just fine for 50 rounds, and then you'll get a light primer strike, and now what, So I agree with you. It's like, if you need that solution, then you need to look for an engineered solution. I mean, because if you have a 1911 that's a 45 ACP, and you put a light enough spring that you can feel the difference in working the slide, well, that's dangerous. I don't mean dangerous in the sense that it's going to blow up or anything, but it's hard on the gun. It's really going to affect your reliability. And the other half of the equation, though, is that the hammer spring itself also contributes a good deal to the difficulty of working the slide. Because as you work the slide, you're cocking the hammer, right? So you're not just compressing the recoil spring. And so, you've only done a half fix. So technically, you should do work on the hammer spring to make it lighter. Otherwise, that will contribute to malfunction. So that's really a bad thing to do. So as you say, I mean, buy a gun that's sort of factory engineered or built by somebody who really knows what they're doing.
Yeah.
Like,
the other option is something we're seeing more and more of, and that's the tip-up barrels. Typified like by the Beretta Tomcat, but I know EAA does some guns like this, and I'm trying to think of some others, but those are actually maybe even a little easier to operate than some of the EZ slide type guns, because basically you pop the barrel up, put a bullet in it, pop it down, and your gun's loaded. So
I agree. And the slide is easy to run because they're 380s.
Yeah.
Yep. They do make 9mm versions now.
Yep.
Which, yeah, I really like that. You're exactly right. Like, if you have pretty arthritic hands, to where you have a little trouble manipulating things, well, then pushing that little lever that pops the barrel up is, that'd be relatively easy to do. And as you say, you just drop a cartridge in and then close the barrel back down and you're ready to go. And now when it's time to make it safe, you just pop the barrel back up again, Yep. Actually, that's not a bad thing right there, because you could store the gun that way, next to your bed or something if you're concerned about it. Just leave the chamber loaded and the barrel popped up.
Yeah.
If you need the gun, all you do is push the barrel down. You're ready to go to work. So.
Yep.
Oh, the other thing, were you going to talk about 9mm 1911s?
No.
Because we should do that, because everybody now has 9mm 1911s. And yes, whenever I write about one, whenever I do a video about one, there's always that contingent that says, well, it's almost 45 or nothing, Well, that's fine. If you can do that, then you should go do that, right? But I'm at a point now where I have some arthritis in my hands. I mean, I turned 70 years old. I don't like to get beat up anymore. I've spent a lifetime shooting big bore guns. And all my 1911 stuff is pretty much 9mm now.
Yep.
And it's easier to run the slide. The gun's engineered for it, and recoil impulse is lower, and it's just really pleasurable. And as that transition started, 10 years ago or so, everyone was a doubting Thomas. Well, that's stupid. John Browning meant that to be a 45, right? That kind of stuff. It's like, yeah, okay, I got it.
Yeah.
But as people started to buy them and shoot them and use them, and they realized that actually this is a really good thing, Yep. And so explore that.
Well, and part of the history, the urban legend there is a lot of 9s in the early days didn't work in the 1911 platform. Now they do. As we've said many, many, many times, you don't see too many guns that reach the market now that don't work as they're intended to work.
Right here, I have a Springfield Armory EMP, right? 3-inch barrel. 1911 9mm. Well, 10 years ago, this would have been impossible.
Yeah.
I mean, nobody knew how to do it, So, like you say, they didn't run. Custom pistol smiths were starting to look into how to do it, but it was all experimenting. What spring and what, everything was just up in the air. But once the big companies realized that, hey, this is a market, well, then they put their R&D guys on it, and they solved all these engineering problems. And, man, I mean, I can't think of a 9mm 1911 that I've tested in the last 5 or 8 years. It just didn't run like a top, was accurate as a laser, And with modern 9mm ammunition, you're not giving anything up to a 1911. Sorry, or, to a 45. Sorry, but that's the truth.
Yeah. Yep. Well, and I wanted to address that part of it that you brought up. We've addressed it many, many times, and we've actually done shows specifically on this. But I really hope that this episode may get a few folks that don't normally watch us. And by the way, please like and subscribe. We would love to make you part of the Guns Magazine family. But this whole idea of stepping down in caliber, 45 is great, but as we've said, statistically now a 9 is pretty close, and even if you're getting down into the 380s and even the 22 long rifle, is that my choice of a carry gun? No, but it fulfills the requirement number one of self-defense, which is in a gunfight, have a gun. So life is full of trade-offs. And if the choice is not carrying a gun or only carrying a 380 or only carrying a 22 for that matter, I would vote for carry a gun. So, yeah, the gun store commando will tell you, well, just suck it up and shoot the 45 or suck it up and carry a full house 44 revolver. That's great. And he's trying to sell you a gun, but there is no harm, no foul, no dishonor with if all you can manipulate is a 380 with a tip-up barrel. Hey, at least you got a gun, and you're worlds ahead of all the sheeple out there.
Well, it's like our podcast we did, and I forget the title. You have to remind me of the title, but it was what Carrying a Gun Sucks.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, I think that was the title, right?
Yeah.
Well, then let's put ourselves in this position. Now, I have my strength. I can walk. I can use my hands. I can do that. Carrying a gun still sucks.
It does.
Right. Okay, now maybe I'm wheelchair bound, and maybe I'm otherwise infirm, and maybe I have arthritis in my hands. Okay, well, now carrying a gun really sucks, And so I'm actually very familiar with a friend of mine and his issues here. I was very good friends with Terry Tussey, the custom pistol smith. And I knew Terry for 35 years. And then he had a bicycle accident and he broke a cervical vertebrae. And so he was paralyzed from the chest down. So he had his upper arms, but he was wheelchair bound completely. And it was hard for him because he was a strapping 6'2". When Terry was 65 years old, he would have whipped both of us easily. He always drove a big block truck. And he was just an outdoorsman, man's man. Used to ride his dirt bike. That's how he fell off his dirt bike. So, and he was a custom pistol smith. Of no small amount of fame. So now he's wheelchair bound. And once he got out of the hospital, we spent a lot of time on the phone talking to each other about all kinds of things because he stayed in the business. He kept working on guns. We had his guns on the cover afterwards. But he and I used to talk about that. And I would say, Terry, what do you do? How do you do it? And he said, I experimented with everything. He said, I experimented with a shoulder holster. He said that didn't work because it eventually prods you, and I got to try to get it on and off, and I don't move very well. He said I tried a fanny pack. He said, but the problem was then the fanny pack would slide over and get down behind,
Yeah.
He said I tried a gun by the arm of the wheelchair that he used to keep a drape over it.
Yeah.
And he said that wasn't bad. He said, at least it's like I had it there.
Yeah.
But what he ultimately settled on was two things. He had a fanny pack, and then he would keep a cross-draw holster on. But his cross-draw holster was more of almost like those small of the back holsters that carry the gun horizontal? It was more like that. And so it was carried it almost horizontal, and it was right on his waist. And so he had some Velcro that he would sew to his belts, and so the holster would just stick to the Velcro on that spot.
Wow.
Well, because that way he didn't have to try to put a holster on a belt and he wouldn't even wear a belt. Why wear a belt? So anyway, it was a real challenge for him, and he went through almost like everyone has that box of holsters. He had his equivalent of a box of holsters while he sorted it out, and. He also used to carry always had a bigger gun in a little zippered bag that hung from a little place on the back corner of his wheelchair. And so basically he had the instant gun up here, but he said, if I'm in a bank or some big things going on, I have time, I'm going to reach back here and get my bigger gun. Yeah. And, so there you go. If you're in the wheelchair, there are options. Don't just give up and say, well, no, I'm not going to carry anything. Because, as you say, Brent, 22, what's rule 1? Have a gun. Yeah. A North American Arms pug, for instance. Yeah. I think, this is a 22 long rifle North American Arms, and this happens to be a little pocket holster by Thad Ribka. But there's bound to be a way for you to carry this even if you're wheelchair bound,
And for some strange reason, I've pointed this out before, and I'm going to point it out again. Whenever we talk about North American Arms, we get lots of positives, and there's always 2 or 3 people that just lose their mind. That's terrible. I hate those guns. You're going to be killed. And I don't know why they inspire that in people. They're first quality. I carry one as a backup piece a lot. I've carried it as a primary before in certain special circumstances, but there's absolutely nothing wrong with them. Some of maybe, I don't even know that they have any competition anymore, but there have been some over the years. Some were pretty good, some were not. But North American Arms, I can't recommend highly enough. And if that's all that you feel you can physically carry, I would never criticize you for that. So to the folks that are going to leave those emails or the comments, okay, we get it. You don't like them. Good for you. But for the rest of the real world, there's nothing wrong with them.
And most of those naysayers are keyboard commandos. And because
absolutely.
I always say, really, tell me exactly what problems you've had in the past with these guns, because usually they've never even owned one.
Exactly. That's what kills me. I don't have one, but I never would. Well, then you don't know, so shut up.
You don't know. I mean, I've probably owned 24 or more.
Yeah.
I mean, right now I've probably got a half a dozen different models and stuff. Like, they make one that's really intriguing and fits appropriately for what we're talking about. They make like a 3-inch and I think a 4-inch barrel 22 Magnum, and it's got adjustable sights. And, you know, they make a cool cross-draw holster. Other people make, I think Galco or somebody even made some nice holsters for them. But, I mean, gosh, that's an option. If you can manipulate the gun, you know, granted, if you're arthritis hands, or you may not be able to manipulate this, but I will say one thing, though, is that small auto pistols, you know, like that, the whole, and I'm not capping on the brands because they're all excellent, but, you know, a Ruger LCP Max or a tiny Taurus or a tiny, all the little tiny automatics, those are hard to manipulate. You know, they're a bit fumbly. The slides are actually often hard to run. Because you need a much stronger spring because you have a lightweight slide, right? And a short slide, so you need a stronger spring. So we're not talking like an easy 380 on that. It's an entirely different animal. And I don't think that's probably the right gun for somebody like that, you know. But like that, what's the Ruger revolver, the LCR, light compact revolver? They have particularly light actions from the factory, and so if you're really challenged and maybe you can't handle recoil, so you get one of those in 22 long rifle or 22 Magnum, and so it's grippy enough that even if you're you have some hand problems, you probably can hang on to it, and you can probably manipulate the trigger, and they're safe. You know, and you can open the cylinder, and so I would say don't give up and just say, oh, no, you know. I mean, because some gun is better than none gun.
Yep.
You know?
Exactly. And, you know, I was going to talk some more about holsters, and I think we've really covered it. And I think you can cover it by saying you're going to have to experiment. And it works the same with the gun. You know, if you find that you're having trouble shooting, start experimenting, and it may mean borrowing a gun from somebody to try out. I mean, most of us have a friend that, hey, can I try your XYZ? Well, yeah, let's go to the range. A lot of rental ranges, you can rent guns and try that out. And the same with the holsters. You're going to have to go through a bunch of them. And we've talked about this before, that, like you said, Roy, you've got a big box of holsters. This is the ultimate holster. And then you try it, and no, this is not the ultimate holster. And you may even need to build something. They're custom holster makers. And I've talked before, I built a water bottle carrier that was even complete with a faux water bottle on top that was actually a pistol. Or a holster. So, you know, you just need to experiment, see what works for you, because every person's ability/disability is different. So these are some ideas, but I hope we've maybe inspired you to not say, oh, to hell with it. You know, I'm having a hard time carrying my whatever, and I'll be fine. You know, nobody's going to bother me because I'm old or because I'm in a chair. You still need to carry and stay salty.
Well, like, for instance, in Terry's case, he virtually always carried cocked and locked officer's ACP, which he built, right? And then, but when he ended up in the chair, he tried to carry that again, and it just was ungainly for what he was trying to do. And like he said something interesting, he said, if something is chafing me, I don't know it. You know?
Yeah.
And he said, so I would get pinched or poked or prodded, and and I look down and I'm bleeding. He said, I can't feel it.
Oh, wow.
So what do you do? For from my experience in talking with people who are especially wheelchair bound, and from the articles that were written for us over the years by people who were in wheelchairs of different degrees of disability, there seemed to be a common theme. And the common theme that I saw was many of them, if not most of them, always ended up with a small, almost like a fanny pack kind of a thing on their front. And because they carried, their medicine and a little flashlight and whatever things they may have needed specifically, their syringe with medication they had to take or whatever it was. But they tended to be these little packs that they tended to be on their lap because that's where they can get to, right?
Right.
And then if they need to be moved onto the bed or something, they take the pack with them. Mm-hmm. And so that seems like a pretty good solution, so it's like the old days of the fanny packs. They're coming back. You probably noticed that. They're a resurgence of those. Yeah. And so be thinking about that, because I actually knew a guy who had double crutches. So he was able to get around, but it was double crutches. And so he actually it was like a fanny pack that he had mounted on one of his crutches. So, on the inside edge of this crutch. Yeah. And so he actually would go to the range and practice. What he would do is he would basically, lean, he would drop this crutch and then lean on the other one. So now he's got his two kind of infirm legs, but they could kind of support his weight, right?
Yeah.
And he was leaning on the forward crutch, and then he would draw this gun out of the fanny pack and then shoot at the targets or do whatever,
Yeah.
And because he used to laugh, he had a great sense of humor, and he would say, well, the only problem is now I can't really go anywhere because my other crutch is on the ground down there. He said, so hopefully somebody will come by and pick it up for me. Yeah. But boy, what a spirit of, can do.
Yep.
And I thought that was innovative. And I remember he had a little clip that he found from something. I don't remember what it was. And he had a little tactical flashlight that he kept clipped so he could get to it.
Perfect.
Because like he said, you can't always reach into your pocket.
Yeah.
He said, I have to be able to reach it there.
Well, that's a perfect segue into my final 2 points. And the first one is, that is great that your friend did that because, and we're guilty of this at times too, but whatever you pick, whatever you choose, you got to try it. You got to take it to the range. You got to shoot it. You got to see. And that's how you're going to find out, this holster doesn't really work. It works great in theory, but in the real world, it doesn't work. Or I can get one shot with this gun, but I can't get two because it hurts my hand too bad. So whatever you do, whatever your plan is, test it, make sure it works. And the final thing is a little more esoteric, but we're going to get into the world of tactics, which is something we don't really talk about, but this is more of a concept. And that is, if you're older, much older, or you're infirmed in a wheelchair, take advantage of the fact that people don't consider you a threat. And I think Roy can probably share stories too. I always, after being a cop for a while, I always considered people in a chair far more dangerous because they could be hiding literally bazookas and who knows what and multiple weapons, but your average scumbag considers you an easy mark and easy to take down. So as we've talked about before, use it. If you're confronted by somebody, play the cowering victim, play the semi-addled old man or the helpless wheelchair-bound victim until you choose to act, and then act with, alacrity and fierceness and make them think, oh crap, man, did I pick the wrong person. So
that's really, really really good advice. And you're right. I mean, I'm at a certain age now. When my back acts up, I have a cane, a walking cane, right? And, people stop and open doors for me and everything. And I think, okay, don't, but because you get guys like us, we have a lot of experience in the field. We know how to shoot guns. We are situationally aware. And at some level, we are among the more fearsome victims. I mean, because like you say, when they least expect it, it's like, I'm going to light this guy up. And he's going to go, the last thing he's going to remember is, what?
Yeah.
One more thing, though, is interesting is I remember, I think it was Will Dabbs wrote an article one time, and it was, Will's crazy, so he has this cut-down, side-by-side 20-gauge shotgun with a pistol grip,
the snake gun.
The snake gun, yeah. And this was, 25 years ago, he wrote his first article for me as he wrote about that. And, but we exchanged an email or two, but he kind of went, this may be the perfect wheelchair gun.
Oh my goodness.
And it's like, I thought about it. I thought, well, we've seen movies where there's like the bad guy is in a wheelchair and he's got machine guns that pop up out of the, arms or something, right? Yeah. And a grenade launcher that comes from the back. Yeah. But I just remembered it, but I thought, if you were in a place where you're allowed to own a gun like that, and because it'd be easy to conceal down someplace here, build a little flap, nothing holster. It looked like you had an umbrella or something, right?
Yeah.
But boy, talk about being surprised by this victim.
Oh, can you imagine? That would actually be pretty humorous.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I will say, as a former police officer, if I responded to a call where someone who is wheelchair bound shot a bad guy who was trying to harm him, and he used his double-barreled sawed-off 20-gauge shotgun, I'm sorry, I'd be shaking his hand and laughing, and I'd be calling all the other guys, say, come on over, you got to see this,
Look at the look on the guy's face.
What? Boom. What is it? Stop, smile, wait for flash.
Exactly.
So, all right.
So
I want to hear from people. No, in other words, if you are infirm, and even if you have really bad arthritis, if you have a gimpy knee or you're in a wheelchair, tell us where we're wrong. In other words, please post. I read every single comment on all this stuff, and Brent does his best too. And we will read it, and we will know about it, and I'll more than likely answer you. So please do tell us. And if your comment's really interesting, what I'll do is I will sometimes copy them and send them to Brent, and then he'll use them in, for instance, the Guns reader mail.
Yep.
So let us know.
Let us know
what we don't know.
Well, again, if you found us when you were searching for information about this topic and you are not a regular viewer, we welcome you and hope you'll come back. This is what we do. We just get together and talk about stuff without waving our arms or acting like tactical ninja, Delta, Squirrel, Recon. We're just real folks that have been blessed to have some experience. So, Roy, I appreciate you talking, and we'll get back together again sometime soon on the Guns Magazine podcast. Well, I hope Roy Huntington and I gave you a few ideas on how to keep carrying your gun, regardless of your age or any physical problems. Well, before I go, please don't forget, we've got some great new books. They make great Christmas or holiday gifts. The Odd Angry Shot by John Connor, and of course, Roy's new book, The Insider. Those are both available at fmgpubs.com or at Amazon. So Odd Angry Shot and The Insider. Well, that's it for this episode of the Guns Magazine podcast. On behalf of everybody who works so hard here at FMG Publications, I'm Guns Magazine editor Brent Wheat, reminding you yet again, now get out there and get shooting.